The rain had started early that evening, a steady drizzle turning the city into a blur of light and reflection. Inside Le Méridien, the air was warm with candlelight and quiet jazz. Mia moved between tables with the effortless grace that came from years of practice, her apron tied neatly, her smile polite but distant. It was a slow Tuesday night, except for the man in the corner booth. He came every week, always alone, always at the same time. A tall man with dark hair slightly streaked with silver, the kind that suggested both power and pain. His suit was immaculate, his cufflinks understated, but his eyes told a different story. Deep, tired, and endlessly searching, as if he were looking for someone he had already lost. Mia had overheard the whispers from the kitchen staff. That's Adrian Locke, the CEO of Locke Industries. His wife died 3 years ago in a car crash. To the others, he was a tragic urban legend. To Mia, he was just another lonely soul trying to fill a void with silence and wine. She approached his table with her usual calm. "Good evening, Mr. Locke, your usual." He looked up, startled for a brief second, then nodded. "Yes, thank you, Mia." His voice was deep, smooth, but brittle at the edges, as though it hadn't been used for anything gentle in a long time. As she poured his wine, he studied her. Not in a predatory way, but like a man trying to remember a dream that was slipping away. The candlelight flickered across her face, catching the small curve of her smile, the same shade of hair that fell over her shoulder, details that twisted his heart in ways he couldn't explain. "You look," he began, his voice faltering, "just like her." Mia froze, the bottle still in her hand. She had heard men say many things to her while serving tables, flattery, complaints, drunken nonsense, but this felt different. It was as if his words carried the weight of a lifetime. "I'm sorry," she asked softly. He shook his head quickly, embarrassed. "Forgive me. That was inappropriate. You just remind me of someone I used to know." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence between them. Mia placed the glass gently on the table, her hand trembling slightly. When she turned to leave, his voice stopped her again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "Would you stay? Just for a moment?" She hesitated, meeting his eyes. There was something raw there, grief, longing, and a kind of loneliness that reached out like a shadow. Against her better judgment, she nodded and sat down. Adrian took a slow breath, as though gathering the courage to break the fragile boundary between them. "You remind me of my wife," he said finally. "Her name was Alara, and for one night, just one, I'd give anything to see her again." Mia's heart ached at the words. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Outside, the rain grew heavier, as if echoing the pain neither of them could name. Mia couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying his words, "Be my date. Pretend to be her." At first, she thought it was grief speaking, or maybe loneliness tangled with too much wine. But when she came to work the next day, the same man was waiting, calm, composed, and terrifyingly sincere. Adrian Locke wasn't a man people said no to. His presence carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed, yet there was nothing arrogant about the way he asked. "I meant what I said," he told her. "Just one day. No expectations, no strings. I only want to remember what happiness used to feel like." Mia hesitated, her apron still in her hands. She was just a waitress, an invisible face in a crowd of customers who came and went. Why her? Why now? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she couldn't refuse, not power, not pity, but pain. Pure, human pain. Against every logical thought, she whispered, "Okay, one day." The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside her modest apartment building. The driver stepped out first, but Adrian emerged before he could open her door. Gone was the stern CEO in a tailored suit. He wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly tousled. He looked almost ordinary, nervous, even. "You look beautiful," he said, almost under his breath. Mia glanced down at her floral dress, plain, secondhand, hardly elegant, but the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. Their day began at a small art gallery downtown. Adrian moved through the exhibits like a man stepping into old memories. "This is where we met," he explained softly. She was arguing with the curator about the meaning of a painting. I couldn't resist joining in. He chuckled. His first real laugh in years. Mia smiled, listening, letting him talk. From there, they went to a little cafe tucked in a side street, one that still served the exact pastry he said his wife used to love. He ordered two, then pushed one toward Mia. She always said sweetness makes the bitterness bearable. He didn't mean the coffee. In the afternoon, they drove to the pier. The wind tangled Mia's hair, and the sea stretched endlessly before them. Adrian stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes distant. "This is where I proposed," he said quietly. "It was raining, just like last night." She said yes before I even finished asking. For a while, neither spoke. The rhythm of the waves filled the silence between them. And though Mia knew she was only standing in someone else's place, she couldn't help feeling the ghost of something real growing between them, an unspoken connection born not from love, but from shared loneliness. When he finally turned to her, his voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for coming with me." She smiled, gentle and sad. "Thank you for remembering." And as they stood there, bathed in the fading gold of sunset, Mia wondered whether healing sometimes came disguised as pretending. The sky had turned a bruised purple by the time they reached the garden. It was small, almost hidden behind wrought iron gates and overgrown hedges, yet Adrian insisted on showing it to her. "This is where we scattered her ashes," he said quietly, guiding Mia along the narrow path lined with late-blooming flowers. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying a faint scent of lavender that reminded him of Alara. He stopped at a marble bench, weathered by rain and time, and sank onto it as if the weight of the day had finally caught up with him. Mia stayed beside him, unsure how close was too close. There was a delicate boundary between grief and comfort, and she didn't want to cross it. Yet, she also couldn't walk away. Adrian's hands rested loosely on his knees, trembling slightly. "I thought I could move on," he murmured, staring at the small patch of earth where a single white rose had been planted. "I buried myself in work, meetings, and deadlines, thinking time would erase the pain. But it didn't. It just hollowed me out." Mia felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know what to say, so she simply reached out and brushed her hand against his. It was tentative, nothing romantic, but human, a reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. He looked at her then, really looked, and the hard edges of his grief softened just enough to let in the faintest light. "She used to say love doesn't end," he whispered, voice breaking, "it just changes shape." I didn't believe her at first. I thought love dies with the person, but maybe she was right. Maybe it changes into memory, into something that can still be felt even when they're gone. Mia nodded, unsure how to comfort a heart so heavy with loss. She squeezed his hand, letting the silence carry their thoughts. Around them, the garden seemed alive, petals trembling in the evening breeze, leaves whispering secrets only grief could understand. For the first time in years, Adrian let himself feel something more than sorrow. He smiled, soft and vulnerable, almost as if he were afraid the world would take it away if he dared to hold it. "Being with you today, it's like seeing her again, just for a moment. I know it's impossible, but I needed this. Needed you." Mia's chest ached, but she returned the smile, gentle and careful. She knew she was only a shadow, a stand-in, yet her presence had allowed him to touch a part of himself he had abandoned. And in that fleeting connection, there was something sacred, grief met with empathy, pain met with understanding, memory met with life. As they sat together on the bench, the last rays of the sun fell over them, painting the garden in golden shadow. And for one day, two lonely souls found a fragile, fleeting peace, an echo of love that refused to vanish completely. The evening air was cool and carried the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement as Adrian walked Mia back to the restaurant. The streets glimmered with reflections of neon signs and wet asphalt, and the city hummed quietly around them, indifferent to the fragile bubble of time they had shared. Inside, the restaurant had emptied almost completely, leaving only the soft clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of jazz from the speakers. Adrian stopped near the entrance, turning to her with a hesitation that made his usual commanding presence almost unrecognizable. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked down at the floor, gathering words that felt heavier than any boardroom decision he had ever made. "Thank you," he said finally, voice low and raw, "for giving her back to me for one more day." Mia's heart tightened. The weight of the day pressed down on her as she realized how deeply she had been part of this man's healing, even if only for a moment. "And what about tomorrow?" she asked softly, the question both hopeful and tentative. He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time beyond the shadow of his grief. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence between them was filled with all that had been said and all that had been felt. Then, with a quiet sigh, he reached into his pocket and removed his wedding ring, slipping it into a small velvet pouch. "Tomorrow, maybe I start learning to live again," he admitted, voice thick with emotion. "I've been trapped in the past for too long. Today reminded me that it's possible to feel again, without forgetting, without guilt." Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. "You deserve to feel," she whispered, "and to remember without pain consuming you." He smiled faintly, a fragile curve that carried both gratitude and lingering sorrow. He hesitated, then took a small step closer, enough to let her feel the warmth of him without crossing any boundary. "You've been more than I expected, more than I could have hoped for," he admitted. They stood there for a moment, two strangers bound by a day that had transformed them both, caught between goodbye and the promise of life beyond grief. Then Adrian turned, straightening his shoulders, slipping the velvet pouch into his pocket, and walked away toward the quiet streets, leaving Mia with a heart full of understanding and the faint echo of something sacred. Mia watched him disappear into the city lights, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and peace. She realized that sometimes love isn't about holding on to someone forever. Sometimes it's about being present, even for a fleeting moment, helping them remember the joy they thought was lost, and giving them the courage to face tomorrow. And as she turned back into the warm glow of the restaurant, she carried the day with her. A day that had begun with a simple plea and ended with a quiet, unforgettable lesson about loss, healing, and the fragile power of human connection.